Good morning and welcome to all. The fifth session of the Faculty Development Program organized by Wing, Directorate of Distance Education, Annamalai University, is to be commenced now. The session is to be handled by Dr. Ayyappa Raja, Associate Professor of English, Annamalai University. I am happy to introduce Professor Ayyappa Raja. He is a gold medalist in MA English at Annamalai University. He has completed MPhil and PhD in the same Annamalai University. He also holds MA degree in Tamil and qualified SLET in English. He has 18 years of teaching experience at the university level. His area of specialization is Indian writing in English poetry. He has successfully guided more than 10 PhDs and 25 MPhil scholars. He has published more than 80 research articles in various reputed international national journals. He has presented more than 60 research papers in international national conferences held at various places including Maharashtra, Andhra, Kerala, Odisha, Puducherry and Tamil Nadu. He has acted as a resource person for a number of conferences, workshops, etc., etc. He had visited Singapore to act as a resource person for an international conference. He authored and edited 4 books, namely God and Creativity in Poetry of Syed Amanuddin, English Through Literature, Prose, Edward II, and Comparative Literature and Translation, Changing Paradigms. He served an expert in the workshops on review of new English textbook organized by Tamil Nadu Textbook Society, Chennai. He has organized 4 national level conferences as organizing secretary and coordinator. He is a poet and a literary critic. He has published nearly 20 poems in the popular reputed periodicals. He has delivered numerous lectures on different occasions in different capacities. He has been serving as an editor for the journal like Notions, Literary Conference, Voice of International, Writers, Editors, Critics, and International Journal of Multicultural Literature. He is an executive member of the Guild of Indian Writers, Editors, and Critics. Now, we are inviting Professor Ayyappa Raja to handle the session. Welcome, sir. Now I hand over the session to you, sir.
Thank you, madam. Shall I begin?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Very good morning to one and all. First of all, I thank Professor Shankari ma'am for having given the opportunity to present my lecture on Art of Academic Writing in the Faculty Development Program, which is organized by the History DDE wing of Annamalai University. Very good morning to one and all the participants, learned professors, my good friends, research scholars, and friends. Very good morning once again to you. The title of my presentation today, Art of Academic Writing. Art of academic writing. Academic writing, that means formal writing. Academic, formal writing. Especially publishing research articles, preparing the dissertations, publishing term papers. In all these endeavors, we need formal writing. We need formal writing or academic writing. We have a question: how can we present our writing, especially in English language? Many people, they wrongly think that they can use bombastic words, bombastic expressions, words which are very difficult to understand, or the style which is very difficult to follow. But the language experts, they say the thesis or the term paper should be self-explanatory. We should not make the readers to feel the obscurity. We should not make the readers to feel the difficulty in following the presentation. We have to avoid bombastic words which are very difficult to understand, or the style which is very difficult to follow. Rather, in research writing, in formal writing, we have to use words which are simple, and easy to follow. So we have to use such words. Style, we can use a lofty style, but at the same time, we should make the readers to follow our presentation. It's a sort of preamble. I would like to present what I am going to do today. First of all, the thesis statement. We have to take up the thesis statement. Any research article or any research document like a dissertation or thesis, at first we have to present the purpose of the study. It is called objective of the study. Purpose of the study or objective of the study. So we have to present the objective of the study, the purpose of the study at first. This is called thesis statement. We should not go away from the purpose of the study. We should not go away from the objective of the study. Whatever we write in our thesis, whatever we write in our term paper, whatever we write in our research article, that should be related to the thesis statement. The title of the thesis as well as the chapter classifications also should have the same relationship. The relationship should be there. They should not be unconnected. They should be connected together. That should be related. In academic writing, in formal writing, we expect clarity. Clarity of ideas. So that should be explanatory. The writing should be self-explanatory. Easily the readers can follow. Not only that, crystal clear manner. The ideas should be given in crystal clear manner. Then, when we come to the language and style of a research article or a thesis, language and style of a research article or a thesis or dissertation, we have to adapt five major aspects, five major features we have to adapt. First among them, to provide some sort of interest, to provide interest, to make the presentation lively, interesting. The language experts, they want to use different sorts of word formations, different kinds of word formations, word orders, word formations can be different every time when we present the paragraphs, the write-up, in the write-up. We call, the language experts call, left and right-handed sentences, left-handed sentences and right-handed sentences. What do we normally use in English language? The right-handed sentences, the conventional way of writing, the conventional way of writing, subject, verb, object, and we present the conventional way of writing. Nowadays, in formal writing, to provide some sort of vitality, some sort of energy, some sort of liveliness, nowadays, the language experts, they want to present different sorts of word formation to create interest on the part of the readers. And this style is called left-handed sentences, left-handed sentences. And we are going to see elaborately one after another. I have the slides also, and we are going to see one after another how we can make the left-handed sentences to arouse the interest on the part of the readers. Then, the next aspect which we are going to focus upon, Latinizations. We know English language has derived words from different languages of the world. English is known for deriving words from different languages of the world. So many languages, so many words come from different languages to English language. English language especially has that the Germanic origin, German origin, Germanic origin. Here, the language experts, they emphasize Latin expressions can be used. Latin expressions can be used rather the Germanic ones. Latin expressions are formal. Words derived from Latin language. Etymologically speaking, etymology, word history. Etymologically speaking, words that come from Latin origin, they have more formality, according to the language experts, especially Robin McPherson, the renowned language expert, and he mentions in his book, English for Academic Purposes, English for Academic Purposes, and he mentions this particular fact, Latin expressions, they have more formality than the German words, Latin expressions can be used in the formal writing, especially in the research papers, in the dissertation, Latin expressions can be used. Then, Another important aspect which we are going to discuss today, the usage of first person. The usage of the first person can be avoided. The usage of the first person can be avoided. First person, especially I. The usage of I conclude that, I consider that. Often we find that the young scholars, they may not know, and they use that the first person expression, I or my observation, my presentation, I think. So I and my, these two, the first person expressions, these two can be avoided in the formal writing, can be avoided in the formal writing. I or my, the usage of the first person is considered to be a sign of immodesty, is considered to be a sign of immodesty. So this is not a good act in research writing, in dissertations, in papers. We have to avoid the first person, the expression, I conclude that, I, my observation is. So it's a sign of immodesty. It is considered to be the sign of immodesty. It is considered to be the sign of immodesty. So having that showing or having that high opinion, it shows the pride of the writer. That's why in formal writing, in research publications, the first person, I, that can be avoided. The first person, I or my, that can be avoided. The another aspect which we are going to discuss today, the avoidance of the dogmatic. The avoidance of the dogmatic. We have to avoid dogmatism from our writings. We should avoid dogmatism from our writing. Then what does dogmatic or dogmatism that means? Dogmatism, that means expressing some ideas, personal opinions, personal ideas, without any proper evidence, without proper any evidence, and making others to follow and asking them not to doubt, and asking them not to doubt. This is called dogmatism. In formal writing, we have to avoid dogmatism. In formal writing, we have to avoid dogmatism. And we are going to discuss elaborately when the slides appear before you, and you can find how we can avoid dogmatism. The another important component, aspect, which we are going to discuss today is eschewing the contracted forms. Eschewing the contracted forms. Contracted forms. In English language, we find many negative expressions, shall not, will not, have not. We have that am not, are not. There are many negative combinations, verbs with negative word not. Then these negatives can be contracted, can be contracted as haven't, shouldn't, hasn't, ain't, aren't, and so on. So these contracted forms, can be avoided, should be avoided in research writing, in formal writing, in academic writing. These contracted forms of negative should be avoided. This is another important aspect which we are going to discuss today. So 5 major aspects of formal writing, academic writing, we are going to discuss, which could be very much useful for the research publication. which could be very much useful for the research publication. And we are going to discuss one by one elaborately when we see the slides now on the screen. These are the 5 components which we are going to discuss today. As already I told you, left and right-handed sentences, Latinizations, usage of first person, which is considered to be a sign of immodesty, the avoidance of the dogmatic, eschewing contracted forms. These 5 aspects we are going to discuss today. Look at that. At first, before we enter into these 5 components, any formal writing, 3 distinctive features we can find. In academic English, any formal writing, we can find 3 distinctive features. And they are, first among them, lucidity, economy, and precision. Lucidity, the clear cut style, the clarity. Lucidity, that means clarity. Our presentation should be clear, a lucid manner. So clarity is needed. In any formal writing, we have to present in a clear-cut manner. Clarity is essential. Then economy. Economy of words. Economy of words. We should not write extensively or that in a wordy manner. We should not use so many words. Rather, economy of words is very, very important. We should not be verbose. We should not write more and more. Economy, that is brevity. Brevity is essential in academic writing. So, lucidity, economy, and precision. Precision, that means exactness. Exactness. We have to present our writing, formal writing, with lucidity, with clarity, with economy, with the minimum number of words, and the precision, with the exactness we have to present. We should not be verbose. We should not be wordy, writing so many words or writing so many sentences. Sometimes the young novice researchers, they attempt to write more and more irrelevantly. So we should not use that sort of writing. Academic writing, that should be crisp, lucid, and economy, and the precision with the exactness we have to present. We have to avoid the obscurity. Obscurity, the difficulty of following, difficulty of understanding. So we have to avoid the expressions or the style or the manner of presentation which are difficult for the readers. Many young researchers, they think that writing with bombastic words or words which are very difficult to grasp, that sort of writing can be accepted, can be used in thesis writing or in research publication. But the language experts, they consider that using simple expressions, using lucid language, a simple, clear, with the economy and the precision, exactness, that sort of language is welcomed by all. We should not make the readers to feel the difficulty of following our presentation, So we should avoid digressiveness. Digressiveness should be avoided. Digressiveness, that means meandering or wandering. Sometimes the young researchers may attempt to write something irrelevantly, something related to the subject but not directly related to. They begin that another topic and then they continue in the writing. That can be avoided. That sort of meandering or wandering in formal writing can be avoided. If the researcher feels it is very much essential, he has to refer such elements such matters in the form of footnotes or in the form of appendices. He can add at the end of the thesis, or he can add at the end of the research article. The researcher can present in the form of footnotes or appendices. At the same time, in the main text, digressiveness should be avoided. Whatever is written in that text, that should be related to the purpose of the study, the objective of the study. Whatever is presented by the researcher, that should be relevant to the title of the thesis or dissertation or research article. The researcher should not be carried away and should not add so many matters into the main write-up of the thesis or the research article. So the clear organizational pattern, another important aspect which the academic English needs, the clear organizational pattern. We know that the write-up can be divided into many paragraphs. The write-up can be divided into many paragraphs. In each paragraph consists of one major idea. So paragraph development is essential in formal writing. Each paragraph consists of one major idea, chief idea. That idea may be supported by the other sentences in the paragraph. That the sentence which consists of the major idea is called topic sentence. Language experts, language teachers, they call the idea on which the entire paragraph is constructed. That idea, the sentence which consists of that idea, we term, the language teachers term that sentence as topic sentence. So topic sentence that may come sometimes at first the paragraph, or at the middle of the paragraph, or at the end of the paragraph. So topic sentence that presents the major idea of the paragraph. So it's a self-contained unit. The paragraph is a self-contained unit, and we find one particular idea the paragraph presents. So these are the three distinctive features which the formal writing, formal English that needs from the writer. And we can find that the differences between academic writing and the creative writing. In academic writing is a formal writing. Here, formal tone can be presented, can be maintained. It should be formal. We cannot just present just as we speak. Academic writing that needs a formal tone. So writing here that needs formal tone from the writer. Then facts that should be accurate. Accurate facts should be presented by the writer. Accurate facts should be presented by the writer, especially accurate data that should be presented in the academic writing. On the contrary, creative writing in the poem or in an essay or in a novel, we find that creative writers, they use imagination. They use imagination and they have that liberty to not to follow logic, not to follow any sort of facts, because they give emphasis to imagination. Creative writing that focuses much upon imagination, but the formal writing that focuses upon facts and formal tone. The writers, the poets, creative writers, they have that liberty. They have that poetic license. For example, John Keats, the famous romantic poet in English literature, in his poem, Ode to a Nightingale, and he hears the song of the nightingale, the song that mesmerizes him. Already he suffered from various personal problems. The song of the nightingale has given him joy. After hearing the song of the nightingale, after listening to the song of the nightingale, immediately he feels the transformation and he has gone to the world of imagination and he has gone to the world of the nightingale. Immediately he has traveled to the world of nightingale and he has started to see the various flowers and started to experience the smells of various flowers and he has traveled to the world of nature. So this is possible in creative writing, but in academic writing, this is not possible. So writers who write that theses or research papers, and they have to be very careful in their tone, in a formal manner. They have to write their articles. Then move to the next important aspect, which we find to get the clarity how that an academician, the formal writing is adopted by an academician. On the screen, you can find that a description about Delhi, the city Delhi. This piece of information is taken from Encyclopedia Britannica. Encyclopedia Britannica. This is a description about Delhi. This is example for formal writing. State, the definition has come. Population 2001 provisional, at present 13,782,976. The population, northern central India and the capital city of India, bounded by the states of Uttar Pradesh and Haryana. The city lies astride the Yamuna River. It comprises the old city of Delhi, popularly known as Old Delhi and New Delhi, and adjacent rural areas. Delhi was the capital of the Muslim dynasty from 1206 until it was laid waste by Timur in 1398. Here we find Delhi is defined in a formal manner, and this is taken from Encyclopedia Britannica. Here we find that the formal tone is presented, facts are presented, very clear data is presented. This is an example for formal writing. This is an example for formal writing. Further, it presents details related to Mughal Barbar, Mughal capital, and then subsequently we find that the government is the chief employer and Delhi is an important commercial, transport and cultural hub. We find that. On the other hand, this is example for formal writing. On the other hand, how the creative writers they write. Creative writers they write. The slide which you have seen on the screen, you find this is an extract taken from Khushwant Singh's novel, renowned novel by the name Delhi, a Novel. Khushwant Singh is a famous Indian English writer, And this particular passage is taken from his novel, Delhi, a Novel. Here, look at that, how the creativity of the writer works and how the writer manipulates his poetic justice, not poetic justice, his poetic license rather. Here you can find that. I returned to Delhi as I returned to my mistress Bhagmati. When I have had my fill of warring in foreign lands, Delhi and Bhagmati have a lot in common. Having been long misused by rough people, they have learned to conceal their seductive charms under a mask of repulsive ugliness. It is only to their lovers, among whom I count myself, and they reveal their true selves. Here you find Kushwant Singh compares the city Delhi with his mistress Bhagmati, and both of them are ugly, and both of them having good futures also. So this is informal way of writing, creative writing, and here that he adds his imagination and he compares the city Delhi with his mistress Bhagmati. This is example for the creative writing. So we have to avoid this sort of writing in formal presentations like theses, dissertations, or research papers. Then come to that important feature, a significant feature, which we are going to analyze about the art of academic writing. Left and right-handed sentences. And here we find that normal way of writing, English writing, we know that. At the same time, to avoid monotony, to avoid boredom, to avoid monotony, and we can change the patterns, sentence patterns, and create variety. And we can create variety to present different word formations, and we can create variety by creating different word formations in sentences that can avoid the monotony, and that can create interest on the part of the readers. Readers, they can have the joy of reading the work and easily they can follow, and it can avoid the monotony or boredom. For that, we have to use different sorts of word formations. To understand this, two passages have been taken. We are going to see that these two passages about George Orwell containing same identical information, but the style is different. The first passage, you can see that passage A, this is the normal right-handed style of writing. George Orwell was born in Bengal, India on June 25th, 1903. He was the son of an official in the Indian Civil Service. He went to Eton and he subsequently joined the Burmese police. He became disillusioned with his class and profession, and in 1927, he returned to Europe. There, he lived among the underprivileged and he adopted the pseudonym by which he is generally known. So this is the normal way of writing the English language. Here, it is formal, no doubt about that, but at the same time, this is a normal way of writing the language to create interest on the part of the readers. The same message can be presented in another way. And you can see that passage B. Here, the left-handed style is used. This is called left-handed style by the language experts. Here you find that the difference, the variety is produced by changing of the patterns, the word formations. Look at the same content is presented here. Born in Bengal, India, on June 25th, 1903, the son of an official in the Indian Civil Service, George Orwell, went to Eton, subsequently joining the Burmese police. In 1927, disillusioned with his class and profession, he returned to Europe, choosing to live among the underprivileged and adopting the pseudonym by which he is generally known. Here, the word formations are changed. This is not the conventional way of writing, but the change has taken place. A change has been done by the writer to create interest on the part of the readers and to avoid monotony, to avoid boredom. So in cricket matches also you find the batsmen, right-hand batsman and the left-hand batsman as partners, they involve and they make the life of the bowlers difficult. Since that some sort of pressure has been applied by them. So the variety, if there is variety that can create interest on the part of the readers, just like that can create interest for the cricket lovers too. In the same way, right-arm bowlers and the left-arm bowlers, you find that they create variety and automatically they disturb the batsman also. So here, this sort of writing, left-handed style of writing. In passage B, you can find the left-handed style of writing, and this can be adapted to arouse interest on the part of the readers, and it can avoid boredom, and it amuses the readers to follow if the word formations are changed, the variation of the word order if it is done. So the variation in word order, here we find that this is vitally an important technique. It can help the writer to avoid the monotony of the reader. So here you find some more examples too. Look at that. Written shortly before the outbreak of the French Revolution, the novel reflects some of the central concerns of those years. Instead of writing, the novel reflects some of the central concerns of those years, which was written before the outbreak of the French Revolution. Instead of writing that the usual conventional way of writing, here the writer has made an attempt to present a different word order, the variation in word order. Look at another example. Being conscious of his own existence, man tries to discover as much about himself as possible. Normally, we find a sentence like this: man tries to discover as much about himself as possible, by being conscious of his own existence. Instead of writing in a formal manner like that, the writer here changes the word order and creates interest on the part of the reader to get interest in reading further. Then, now we can move to the another important aspect in formal writing, in academic writing, Latinizations. Latinizations. As already I told you, English borrowed words from different languages, even words from Tamil language, words from Indian languages that go to English. English derives words from different languages. And the two important languages had a great impact on English. In fact, English descended from Germanic language, German language. And Latin has a strong influence on English language. The language experts, they consider the Latin expressions are more formal Latin expressions are more formal. Latin expressions are more formal than words that come from, words that originate from, words that come from German language. Though interchangeably these words are used, the words from Latin, the same, we are going to see that the table, some of those words, these words more or less used with the same reference, with the same meaning, but at the same time, words that come from Latin language, they have more formality than the words that come from German language. And we are going to see the table, and easily you can understand that the difference between these two sets of words or group of words. Look at the words in the first column on the left of your screen, and look at the words on the right of your screen. The left of your screen, you find that words that come from Germanic language. On the right of your screen, you find that words that come from Latin. More or less, these words are used commonly without any difference. In fact, formal writing insists that language experts, they insist that in formal writing, we have to use words that come from Latin, words that come from Latin. Look at that, all the time. The German origin it has, all the time. Latin expression equivalent for this: constantly, continuously, continually, become worse, deteriorate, big, major, significant, substantial, enough, adequate, ample, sufficient, find out, ascertain, discover. Here, you look at the Latin expressions. They are more formal than the expressions we find from German etymology. From German etymology. In academic writing, we have to adapt words that originate from Latin. For example, though the word big and major, though interchangeably used, but at the same time, both the words connotatively, they have different meanings. Major, in fact, refers to seriousness. For example, a major problem. If you say a big problem, big, that word comes from German etymology, from German, big. The Latin equivalent for that, a major problem. A big problem, a major problem. A big problem, that refers to the size of the problem. Connotatively speaking, it refers to the size of the problem, a big problem. This is somewhat secondary when it compared to the major problem. There you find that the major problem emphasizes the seriousness of the problem. Big refers to the size of the problem. Major refers to the seriousness of the problem. That is why in formal writing, language experts, especially in research articles, in dissertations, in term papers, we have to use the expressions from Latin. That could be better when compared to words that come from German. The next important aspect we have to look and we have to avoid, in fact, the first person in academic writing, in formal writing. The young learners, the young researchers, and they have the tendency to use I or my. The use of I or my. I observe, I contend, I would like to say, I would like to wind up my observation, my thesis, my finding, my presentation, my observation, my contention. They say that sort of expressions in term papers, in research articles, in the dissertations. The language experts, they insist that this sort of first person, I or my, that can be avoided in research writing, that can be avoided in research writing or formal writing or academic writing, because they consider that this is a sign of immodesty, having or showing too high opinion, having or showing a too high opinion of oneself. It's a sign of immodesty, sign of pride. This can be avoided in the formal writing. The usage of I or my, that can be avoided in the formal writing, especially in dissertations. So it's a sure sign of immodesty or egotism, the feeling that the person is superior than others. So it's a sign of egotism. So use that instead of I or my, use some circumlocutions, saying in many words. We have to avoid wordy, we have to avoid verbose in our writing, no doubt about that. But at the same time, to avoid that I or my, we have to use some of the expressions that can be acceptable. For example, the present steady. For example, the present study. Instead of I focus upon, the researcher can say the present study focuses upon. The present study focuses upon. So this sort of circumlocutions can be used in the formal writing. At the same time, passive expressions also can be used to avoid first person, I or my. But at the same time, we have to avoid overuse of them. Otherwise, that may look as unnatural expressions, Then look at what are the possibilities, the circumlocutions, other ways of expressions available to present to avoid I or my, the first person narration. The present writer, this can be used instead of I. The present writer, the present author, the present reviewer, the present study, and all these can be used. And instead, look at the examples. Instead of I or my, look at the examples. To the present writer, at least, Freud's theories, as outlined above, seem to be wholly coherent. Look at that expression, the present writer. Instead of stating that my observation is, my conclusion is, we should not use such expressions. It is the thesis of the present work that, and we can avoid, I will argue in my book that, The present discussion, another expression, the present discussion. The present discussion has focused on the way in which the Renaissance came to Northern Europe. Instead of stating that, I have been discussing this study. Normally, many of the researchers, research scholars, and learned professors, when they write the research papers, when they write the dissertations, and they use this expression, this study. This is a study will be especially concerned with the influence of Ozonian on European literature. Instead of saying that, I will be. I will be especially concerned with. Then this paper. This expression also can be used to avoid I. To this paper will attempt to indagate. Indagate, that means investigate. Indagate, investigate. The links between Nietzsche's writings and 20th century fascism. So here, these are the other alternative terms we find in English language. We have to use them in formal writing, in research writing, in dissertation. We have to use the terms like the present writer, present author, the present work, the present discussion, this study, this paper, and so on. To avoid the first person narration, I or my, and there are expressions with the pronoun one, with the pronoun one, and the expressions with the pronoun one also can be used to avoid first person presentation. Look at the examples. One is tempted to see in these compositions the influence of Oriental mysticism. One is tempted to see, instead of saying that my or I, stating that one is tempted to see. Then the second example, for various reasons, this hypothesis is badly flawed. One may conclude that it requires drastic reformulation at the very least. Instead of saying that, I therefore conclude that. So we have to avoid I, we have to avoid my, the first person expressions, because they are considered to be immodesty. They are considered to be immodesty, having that too much of pride, or having that one's own the egotism, having that ego. So it's a sign of immodesty that expressions can be avoided in research writing. Then we find that expressions with the pronoun we. Robin McPherson, the writer, the language expert, English for academic purposes is a renowned work of him, and I have taken many ideas and illustrations from this book. And he has mentioned that to avoid that first person I or my, we can use the pronoun we also. But sections of critics, language experts, they consider that even the expression related to we can be avoided in formal writing. At the same time, when researchers they go to for paper presentations at seminars or conferences, they use widely we, the expression we. Let us now turn to, let us examine. As we can see that we need to bear in mind. Let us examine. We have attempted to show that when we analyze these expressions with the pronoun we, these paper presenters they use when they deliver their papers, research papers at the conferences. Robin McPherson allows the expression related to we in formal writing, but at the same time, there are language experts, they have some reservations of expressing we. For example, instead of using the country name India, if the researcher uses in our country, if the researcher uses in our country, then this is subjective. So this can be avoided in research paper. This can be avoided in dissertation. Instead of that, using objective way is most welcome. And you find that instead of our country, in India, this can be used instead of our country in formal writing. So there are examples you can see. As we will see, world consumption of fossil fuels is increasing at an unsustainable level. Instead of saying that, as I will demonstrate below. Instead of saying that, as I will demonstrate below. From these figures, we can see that world consumption of fossil fuels is increasing. We can see. Then there are other examples also you can see on the slide. We need to bear in mind. Let us now turn to, let us examine. We have attempted to show, we can easily observe when we analyze, and these expressions can be used instead of I or my. Then the passive expressions also can be used in place of the personal I or my, the personal pronoun I or my. The passive expressions also can be used. Passive certainly deserves a special mention. Look at the examples there. Compare the sentences given there on the slide. In this essay, I will try to consider the various arguments. Here, the writer has used the first person I. In this essay, I will try to consider the various arguments. Then we have to avoid this. Instead of that, we have to use the passive expression. Look at the sentence B. In this essay, an attempt will be made to consider the various arguments. An attempt will be made. An attempt will be made. In the same way, I therefore conclude that the document is a medieval forgery. Look at the revised in B, revised sentence in B. It may thus be safely concluded that the document is a medieval forgery. In the same way, as also can be used, as has been, as will be. And these expressions also can be used, as can be illustrated, as was emphasized above. These passive constructions also can be expressed in place of I or my. Of course, we can avoid the overuse of passive. Otherwise, overuse of passive results the disadvantage of the language, and the language becomes impersonal, and then it seems to be unnatural. At the same time, we should be judicious in using passive constructions in our formal writings. Then another way of avoiding the personal I or we, and you can see that we can use would seem or would appear. Would seem or would appear. Look at the sentence now. I would appear, it would appear that, rather, it would appear that the author's use of the sources is somewhat arbitrary, to say the least. Instead of saying that, I am probably right in concluding that. My conclusion is that. I conclude that. To avoid that, the first person here, it would appear that. It is used. It would appear that. The term is used. Look at the another example in the sentence 2. The author's use of the sources would seem at the very least to be somewhat arbitrary. Would seem to be. Instead of that, here we should avoid to say it is my considered opinion that, my opinion. I consider, I would like to say, I conclude. So we have to avoid such expressions and we have to use would seem, would appear, that sort of circumlocutions, saying in other words, saying in other words. Then we move to the next available expressions which can be used to avoid personal, first person personal expressions. It is tempting to see. It is tempting to see. It is to suggest. One is tempted to see. The idea seems tempting that these expressions can be used to avoid first person I or my. How could a person who had problems spelling even simple words produce so many eloquent speeches? Look at the expression now. It is tempting to suggest that. It is tempting to suggest that he simply had a ghostwriter. Here, instead of saying, I tend to think that, the writer employs the expression, it is tempting to suggest that. There is no harm in using this sort of circumlocutions in the formal writing to avoid the personal, first person expressions. Look at another example. In these descriptions of character, one is tempted to see the reflection of earlier childhood experiences. Instead of saying, I am inclined to see, I am inclined to see, one is tempted to see. Instead of, I cannot help feeling that, the idea seems tempting. So such expressions can be used to avoid the first person. A moment's reflection shows that. Further reflection shows that. Careful reflection suggests that. Closer observation suggests that. So these are the circumlocutions, the other ways of stating, to avoid that the first person, which is a sign of immodesty. To avoid that, there are numerous other ways to state our idea. A moment's reflection shows that. Further reflection shows that. Careful reflection suggests that. Closer observation suggests that. So here we find that such expressions can be used. Another important aspect, arguably. Arguably, this adverb also can be used instead of first person I. Look at the example. Of all the places in Britain, St. Albans has arguably the longest unbroken tradition of Christian worship. It has been a place of pilgrimage at least since Anglo-Saxon times. Arguably can be used instead of I. When we use arguably, at the same time we have to be cautious because it tells this is my opinion, and if I wanted to, I could easily provide evidence or arguments in support of it. We can use arguably. This expression also to avoid the first person, to avoid the first person I or my. Then we can move to that the fourth important aspect, the future, which can be used in formal writing. Here we find dogmatism. We have to avoid dogmatism. Dogmatic, expressing personal opinions or beliefs as if they are certainly correct without evidence, passing the opinions, saying the opinions, or having some beliefs without any evidence, and then expecting that that cannot be doubted, that cannot be questioned or doubted. This is called dogmatism. Dogmatism can be avoided in formal writing. We should not make a generalized statements. We should not make sweeping statements. We should not make generalized statements or sweeping statements without the evidence. In formal writing, in research writing, we should not make hazardous generalizations. Generalizations. So this is a world of science. So the spirit of science that it tells that we should be the finality, we should not make everything final. The vary of finality. The language academic writing also has the tendency. So everything is changing. So this is tentative, only provisional in character. What do we find? Whatever we find, tentative and provisional in character. That's why we have to avoid that the sweeping statements or hazardous generalizations. Hazardous generalizations we have to avoid. And we have to look at the example for our better understanding of how to avoid dogmatism in formal writing. Look at there, the example given. Fyodor Dostoevsky, the renowned Russian writer, was the 19th century's greatest intellectual. Look at the expression, greatest intellectual. The superlative is used. Fyodor Dostoevsky was the 19th century's greatest intellectual. His novels merit the closest attention. Here, you can find that the first sentence, the greatest intellectual, that is questionable. And this can be rephrased so as to be less controversial. Many would regard Fyodor Dostoevsky as the 19th century's greatest intellectual. And we cannot make the sweeping statement, the superlative, Fyodor Dostoevsky was the 19th century's greatest intellectual. This is a sweeping statement, a generalized statement, and certainly we don't have the evidence to prove that Fyodor Dostoevsky was the 19th century's greatest intellectual. Rather, we can rephrase that expression by stating that many would regard Fyodor Dostoevsky as the 19th century's greatest intellectual. Many would regard. We have to use that expression, many would regard. Or simply, Fyodor Dostoevsky was perhaps, look at the expression, perhaps. Fyodor Dostoevsky was perhaps the 19th century's greatest intellectual. Fyodor Dostoevsky was possibly, another expression, possibly, or arguably, or perhaps, many would regard. So we have to use these expressions to avoid the dogmatism in formal writing. Dogmatism in formal writing. So writing in superlatives involves the dangers. So we have to avoid that sort of superlatives in formal writing. So we have to avoid that sort of superlatives in research writing also. He is an unparalleled writer, unrivaled writer. If we mention somebody by stating that he is unparalleled, unrivaled, par excellence, for example, par excellence writer. He is a par excellence writer. If you use such superlatives, then it always involves dangers. So here already we saw one example, the 19th century's greatest intellectual. Here we are not sure about that. We haven't done the exhaustive knowledge of 19th century intellectuals. Without doing that, we arrive at the conclusion, the 19th century's greatest intellectual. So we have to avoid that this sort of superlatives in our writings. This can be applied to most critics. In that expression also, we have to avoid dogmatism because we haven't studied all the critics, but we attempt to say most critics regard Fyodor Dostoevsky as the 19th century's greatest intellectual. So here we haven't done the analysis of all the critics, but we say most critics regard. So we have to avoid that sort of superlatives or that the expressions which actually dogmatic in nature, dogmatic in nature. And then another form of dogmatism also we find that this is called begging the question. Look at the example given there. Everyone knows that smoking marijuana, the drug, the narcotic drug or narcotic plant, leads to drug addiction and other serious personality disorders. Everyone knows that smoking marijuana leads to drug addiction and other serious personality disorders. And we are not sure about everyone's opinion or everyone's opinion about the narcotic plant marijuana, but we use that everyone knows that smoking marijuana leads to drug addiction and other serious personality disorders. So in its present form, the statement suggests that everyone agrees. So here that the problem that occurs, we make that the dogmatic belief. That's why it could be rephrased in a manner more tentative and less final and absolute. This should be replaced by the another way. Look at that, the example. Those who smoke marijuana seem often to fall prey to more serious problems such as drug addiction or otherwise. There is a marked tendency for those who smoke marijuana to fall prey, or possibly there is some evidence to suggest that. So we are at the safer position. We do not generalize, or we cannot make the sweeping statement. There is some evidence to suggest that those who smoke marijuana. So this sort of expression can be used in formal writing. Let us consider the following passage. There are good reasons for regarding certain types of popular music as highly suspect, highly dangerous. So in the sense, rap, death metal, and black metal, for example, are often full of aggression and sometimes can release aggression in the listeners. So this is the passage we find that. The second sentence of this particular passage that can be improved further by using the expression, it is widely acknowledged. It is widely acknowledged. Look at that, the revision. There are good reasons for regarding certain types of popular music as highly suspect. It is widely acknowledged, for example, that rap, death metal, and black metal dance forms are often music forms, are often full of aggression and sometimes can release aggression in the listeners. So here, we should not make a generalized statement or sweeping statement. Rather, this is acceptable. It is widely acknowledged that. So the speaker or the writer is in a safe position. Is in a safe position when they use such expressions in their formal writing. Then there are other expressions which can be used to avoid dogmatism or unfair presentations. For example, apparently, seemingly, appears to, seems to, would appear to, would seem to, and so on. For example, you can look at that, how this can be used. In the course of time, Egyptian art appears to have become increasingly eclectic. It invites from other sources also, eclectic. In the course of time, Egyptian art appears to, not stating directly, rather that not making that dogmatic presentation here, rather a better formal expression, appears to have become increasingly eclectic. Another example, it is a recurrent pattern in or a salient future. You can look at that. Another way of avoiding dogmatism in our writing. Ruthless competitiveness, cruel competitiveness is a salient feature of international corporate culture. International corporate culture. So these expressions can be used to avoid dogmatism. So we have to be careful about that. Then consistent also there. Then we find other expressions like there is evidence to suggest that, it is widely acknowledged that, it seems reasonable to assume that, it seems reasonable to suppose that, one may reasonably suppose that. These expressions can be used to avoid dogmatism, in formal writing or in academic writing, like research articles or theses. Then we find at least in part. Another expression, at least in part. This also can be used. Apart from these expressions, the modal verbs like may, might, and could, may, might, and could, they are also invaluable as a way of avoiding finality. We can use may, might, could, and all these expressions can be used in formal writing. Another way of avoiding dogmatism, there is an element of truth in the notion that, this expression also can be used in our formal writing to avoid dogmatism. Then move to the final feature of academic writing, the fifth feature of academic writing, contracted and uncontracted forms. As already I told you, we have to eschew the contracted forms. Contracted forms are cumbersome, and contracted forms, in fact, normally the negatives, we use negative verbs in our writing in English language. For example, cannot, do not, are not, and all these negative verbs, when they appear in writing, they are cumbersome and clumsy. Awkward and clumsy. That's why simply we contracted them. Cannot contracted in the form of can't. Do not contracted in the form of don't. Are not contracted in the form of aren't. Can't, don't, aren't, ain't, shouldn't. So we have so many contracted forms, especially to refer the negative verbs in our writing. But in academic writing, contracted forms are impossible. Contracted forms should not be used in formal writing. Contracted forms should not be used in formal writing. Sometimes the original forms like cannot, do not, are not, they may be allowed. But at the same time, the contracted forms like can't, don't, aren't, these contracted forms should not be allowed in formal writing, in dissertation, in the thesis, in research papers. Researchers should avoid the contracted forms in research writings. Instead of that, there are alternatives. There are other words. Those can be used by the researchers. For example, can't, couldn't. Can't, couldn't. These contracted forms can be replaced by is unable to, is incapable of, is unable to, is incapable of. Look at the examples. People see that the last government couldn't make any real progress with the country's problems. People see that the last government couldn't make any real progress with the country's problems. Couldn't. This can be avoided. Couldn't, the contracted form of could not, can be avoided. Look at the example how this can be avoided. People see that the last government was unable to make any real progress with the country's problems. Was unable to, was incapable of. So these are the replacements for the contracted expressions. In the same way, doesn't do anything. This can be replaced by does nothing. Doesn't do anything. This can be replaced by does nothing. America is one of the world's worst environmental offenders, and its government does not do anything to improve the situation. Look at the example. America is one of the world's worst environmental offenders, and its government does not do anything to improve the situation. So this can be replaced. Doesn't do anything can be replaced. Very simple. Its government does nothing to improve the situation. America is one of the world's worst environmental offenders, and its government does nothing to improve the situation. So here, these replacements can be used instead of the contracted forms. Doesn't. Another expression is available instead of doesn't. Fails to. Fails to also can be used as an alternative. Look at the example. Their qualifications don't meet the requirements of today's world. Don't meet. This can be avoided by fail to. Look at the second sentence, sentence B. Their qualifications fail to meet the requirements of today's world. Instead of don't, here we find fail to. In the same manner, doesn't, refuses to. Look at the example. The vegans are especially restrictive. They don't even use dairy products. The vegans are especially restrictive. They even refuse to. Instead of don't even, here the writer uses even refuse to use dairy products. So these alternatives can be used to avoid the contracted forms. Contracted forms should not be allowed in formal writing, in research writing. In the same way, you can find that and doesn't. This can be replaced by nor does. Doesn't have anymore. No longer has. This can be replaced by no longer has. In the same way, doesn't appear to. Appears not to. The majority of scientists reject Freudian psychoanalysis because it doesn't appear to accept various inconvenient data. Doesn't appear to. This can be replaced in the second sentence, sentence B. The majority of scientists reject Freudian psychoanalysis because it appears not to accept various inconvenient data. Appears not to. So this can be used. In the same manner, you can find that hasn't, hasn't can be replaced by has failed to, has yet to. Look at the examples for hasn't. For thousands of years, different religions haven't found grounds for mutual tolerance. This can be replaced. Haven't found, this can be replaced. Look at that. For thousands of years, different religions have failed to find, Instead of using haven't found here, have failed to find. This expression has been used by the writer. In the same manner, hasn't can be replaced by has yet to. Look at the example. Science still hasn't found an answer to this question. Science has yet to find an answer to this question. So this is a revised version of it. So in practice, as already I told you at the beginning, the uncontracted form cannot, does not, has not, and these uncontracted forms, they will often be perfectly acceptable. They will appear. This will not be a problem. But at the same time, the contracted forms can't, doesn't, hasn't, these contracted forms should be avoided in the formal writing, should be avoided in the formal writing. So here I just collected various ideas and information from the book, Robin McPherson's book, English for Academic Purposes. For my presentation, I acknowledge this writer for which I used this writer for my presentation. With this presentation, I would like to wind up my presentation. I thank all the participants for your patient listening of my presentation, and I thank the organizers for having given me the opportunity to present my idea on the art of academic writing. Thank you, one and all.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Very good, very nice presentation, sir.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Dear participants, you can post your queries through chat box. Dear participant, if you have any queries, you can post through chat box. Otherwise, you can raise your hand. We will unmute yours. Sir, everyone asking your PPT only, sir.
Fine.
Yes,
Thank
sir,
you so much for the opportunity, and I thank all once again.
Okay, sir.
Shall we wind up the session?
Wait,
1 minute, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
Sir, I am
Yes.
ever thankful to you. So far,
Thank
I
you
am
so much, ma'am.
Sir, I am so far knowing that English is a God's language, and it is a language of international communication. But I think that now we have to feel that it is a language very near and dear to us, particularly young scholars. On
Thank you,
behalf
ma'am.
of the
Thank you.
organizing committee, I record my sincere thanks to you, sir, for your
Thank you, madam.
excellent informative presentation. I also
Thank you.
submit
Thank you so
a
much.
sincere thanks to the participants for their active participation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, madam. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.